Hello, this is John with Brainstorm Comics and Gaming. I'm here this week with Andy.
Hi.
Andy, I approached you, about 6 weeks ago, I guess, at this point, about doing some Warcry material. We feel like we need to add some gaming material to our YouTube channel. You are very interested in Warcry. You've been playing tabletops
Since 2010, yeah. So 11 years. Yeah.
And Warcry started, 2 years ago?
I just started playing Warcry, but Warcry's been out about 2 years. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And the thing that interested you most was kind of breaking down the characters to their mathematical core of how useful they are within the game, right?
Sure, yeah. I started off with Warcry with heroes and the Tome of Champions. You could then add heroes. And I wanted to look at, hey, what heroes can I add? And from there, I finally used my statistics degree for something useful. And I math hammered some Warcry. So I'm going to give that content out for your...
Yeah. And you and I talked about this. This isn't how everybody plays, but some people do break it down to the. Some people play merely for the lore. Some people play for the painting aspect of it. They're not necessarily big gamers. They just love modeling. But this is specifically for the people who do want to delve deeply into the numbers and crunching of all that.
Right.
So if you want to give a quick overview of what you plan on doing with this video series.
So I'm going to be doing Warcry Top 5. That's where whatever category I feel like choosing, I'm going to give you my top 5 for what I think are the best in that category.
Now, obviously, being a mathematician, you probably have a ranking system of how you rated these.
Sure. Yeah, I went into my Excel spreadsheet. I made an algorithm. I worked it, tweaked it, tried to get it to align with what other people thought were good and bad. So, yeah.
So what are the categories you're ranking these on?
My base stat, these are all based on base stats. I couldn't think of a good way to evaluate abilities. Maybe one day I'll come out with that. But for right now, this is your base stats. And that's important because you have abilities are a limited resource. So you want to spend those normally on your leader anyway. So your base troops, if you want them as powerful as you can, so that they can just go out and beat other guys up or move around, whatever you need them to do. So I have 4 dimensions on my ranking system. I have offense, defense, mobility, and value.
So I'm going to jump in for a second.
Sure.
So offense, what is that based on?
Okay, the offense is I calculated the average damage per attack. And then I also included, and this is where my own personal algorithm, it's easy. You could agree or disagree with me on how important this is. And then I included the range. So I multiplied that average damage by the range with little tweaks here and there. And that's going to give you the offense.
Okay. And then the next one is?
Defense. Defense is pretty straightforward. It is the wounds and the toughness.
Okay. And your next one?
Mobility is the movement characteristic. And then I tweaked it a little bit, whether or not they had flying, whether they were mounted. It depends on which game you're playing. Sometimes mounted has a penalty, sometimes it doesn't, but flying is usually always good. So I added in a little bit extra for that.
Okay, and your last one?
Well, I put all those together in an overall, and then I divided the overall score by points. And then value to get the value. So
how much you got out of the points that you put?
Yeah. So whether or not the guy was overcosted or undercosted according to his points value. And
what kind of scale did you put each one of those on?
Every one is on a 1 to 10 scale. 7 is very good. So there are very few 10s. There are a few above 10 that were so good I had to...
They broke your system.
They broke the scale, right? So there's very few of those, and we'll go over one of those today.
Okay. Sounds good. I'm going to go off camera and let you do your thing, sir.
All right. First up, we're going to do the Daughters of Cain, Sister of Slaughter with Barbed Whip and Sacrificial Knife. She's number 5. The Sisters of Slaughter fight for Marathi. And although they're in the order Grand Alliance, they are really on the edges of what order normally is. They love savagery and fighting, and they're vicious warriors who take no prisoners. So the Sister of Slaughter comes in with offense of 5 out of 10, defense of 1 out of 10, mobility 4 out of 10, and a value of 7 out of 10. The offense is an average damage of 4, but she has 2 abilities which can boost her offense. Bathe in Blood for a double, and that's going to boost her attacks and strength by 1. And then Slaughter Strength for a triple, which is it's going to give her strength the value of the double, which is basically you're going to always use it. It's going to max it out at a 6. Generally in Warcry, you always want to go with attacks over increased strength. And the only drawback of that double is that it requires the model to be wounded already, the enemy. The Sister of Slaughter gets a defense of 1 because she has a toughness of 3, which is on the low end, and only 8 wounds. So you want to use her like a glass cannon. Go in there, wreck some stuff, do what she has to do, and get her to move away pretty quickly. For mobility, she's got a 4 because she has a movement of 5, which is pretty decent, but flying, no flying, or any other abilities. Overall, she gets a value of 7 because for only 75 points, you get a model that can do some serious damage, has decent mobility, and is a good overall battle line troop choice. Next up at number 4 is the Caradron Overlord's Arcanaut Company Privateer with Aethermatic Volley Gun. So he's a little expensive at 105 points, but he has excellent ranged combat attacks. The Caradron Overlords are Dwarden guided by the Caradron Code. They are tough. They have ranged combat abilities that are better than any other units out there, but they're hampered a little bit by their lack of mobility. However, you can't go wrong with steampunk dwarves. The Privateer with Aethermatic Volley Gun gets an offensive score of 8 out of 10, defense of 2 out of 10, mobility 2 out of 10, but a value of 7 out of 10. His range of 3 to 15 inches is excellent, and doing an average damage of 4 per activation is outstanding. His defense of 2 out of 10 comes from a toughness of 3 and 12 wounds, but it can be boosted by his double, which is Ancestral Fortitude, which adds 1 strength. Overall, you're probably not going to use it too much, and you're going to save it for your leader. Where the Privateer is hampered the most is from his movement of only 3 inches, which gives him a mobility of 2 out of 10. However, he's not going to be needing to move around too much with that 15-inch range. Coming in at number 3, we have the Idoneth Deepkin Namarti Reaver. The word Idoneth means both extreme seclusion and desperate measures. This comes from the fact that they were pulled from the belly of Slaanesh and they were twisted, which made the other elves despise them. So they fled into the deep, only to come out when necessary. The Namarti Reaver also has a 15-inch range, and he does an average damage of 1, so not quite as much damage, but he has a lot of other attributes that make up for that. He has an offense of 5 out of 10, a defense of 1 out of 10, a mobility of 4 out of 10, and a value of 7 out of 10. The Reaver's offense can be boosted by a double called Stormfire, and it's going to add 1 to his attacks characteristic, which gives it an average damage of 2. With 8 wounds and a toughness of 3, just like the Sister of Slaughter, he gets a defense of 1. But he's a baseline troop, so you're not going to use him for anything more than a speed bump if you absolutely have to. A mobility of 4, he has a 6-inch movement, which can be boosted by an ability that all Idoneth Deep can have called Low Tide, where if it's in the first battle round, you can add the value of the ability to his movement. For 75 points at 8 wounds, His good ranged combat and his good mobility adds to a value of 7 out of 10. Coming in at number 2, we have Seraphon, Skink with Bolt Spitter and Moonstone Club. This is an excellent troops choice. In fact, there's other orders that don't even have a troop choice this good. He gets an offense of 6 out of 10, a defense of 1 out of 10, mobility 4 out of 10, but an overall value of 8 out of 10. The Skink's ranged combat has 12 inches and an average damage of 2. However, his melee combat can all Seraphon have an ability for a quad called Wrath of the Old Ones, which allows you to add half the value of the ability to the attacks and strength characteristics, making almost any melee ability extremely potent. It also has an average damage of 2. Where the Skink is lacking, it has only 8 wounds and a toughness of 2, so he needs to get in and get out quickly. With a 6-inch move, the Skink is going to be very mobile and able to take objectives. The double nimble retreat can give a fighter a bonus disengage action if they're within 1 inch of an enemy model. This is undercosted compared to other factions with similar abilities. When you combine this with the fact that the Skink with Bolt Spitter and Moonstone Club only cost 65 points, the value of 8 really stands out. Now, in the number 1 spot, we have the Stormcast Eternals, Vanguard Auxiliary Chamber, Aetherwing. The Vanguard Auxiliary Chamber is Sigmar's special forces. They go to places like the Bloodwind Spoils, where Warcry takes place, and they're the first troops in to do whatever mission Sigmar needs. The Aetherwing gets an offense of 1, a defense of 1, but a mobility of 10, and a value of 11 out of 10. The Aetherwing got a value of 11 out of 10 because if I left it at 10, it would scale all the other ones as a 7 or below. So I had to give him an 11. 2 great abilities that the Aetherwing has are Tireless Hunters and Warning Cry. Even though he only gets an offense of 1 out of 10, the Aetherwing does have an average damage of 2. But more importantly, it has access to a double called Tireless Hunters, which lets you re-roll a die for another model ranged combat. Given that Vanguard Auxiliary Chamber already has the best ranged combat models in Warcry, that makes your other ranged combat models even stronger. Of course, the Aetherwing has a very low defense and only 6 wounds at a toughness 2. You're not going to want to use these guys in combat too often. The biggest advantage of the Aetherwing comes from its mobility, which is 12-inch flying, almost unheard of in Warcry, and it also has access to the double Tireless Hunters, which adds half the value of the ability to the move characteristic. This ability works regardless of which battle round you're on, so it's pretty well costed compared to similar abilities. One more note is that the Aetherwing does not have the Beast rune mark. This means that it can open doors and pick up treasure. With a 12-inch flying, and that can be boosted, this is going to be extremely useful for any warband. And at only 45 points, the Aetherwing comes in with my top value for troops choice for Warcry. So here I've given you my top 5 for Warcry, troops choice based on their value. Do you agree or disagree? Did I get something wrong? Please let me know. And of course, as always, like, subscribe, and comment below.